Her adopted millionaire dad threw her out. Then her boyfriend arrives in private jet with the president. "Ma'am, the President of the United States would like to personally meet you." Those words didn't just stop the Portman Foundation gala, they shattered it. Because the Secret Service agent standing in the center of that glittering ballroom wasn't addressing my adoptive father, Mark Portman, the famous millionaire philanthropist who'd spent the last hour shaking hands with senators and posing for magazine covers. He wasn't talking to my two half-sisters, draped in designer gowls and diamond necklaces, their smiles frozen in place like porcelain dolls. He was talking to me, Sonia, the black girl in the catering uniform, holding a tray of champagne flutes, trying to stay invisible in the corner of the mansion that used to be my home. You know what they say about karma? Sometimes it doesn't just knock on your door. Sometimes it lands on your father's private airstrip in a jet worth more than his entire estate, with the President of the United States on board. Before we get deep into today's story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, you're welcome to Mr. Paul Stories, where we weave our dreams and hearts together through the magic of stories. Now, let's begin today's story. My name is Sonia Portman, and this is the story of how I went from being the adopted daughter thrown out with nothing but a duffel bag and a sealed letter, to standing in front of the world's most powerful cameras as my billionaire boyfriend looked my father in the eye and said, "This is the woman I love and my future wife." But before I tell you how I ended up shaking the president's hand while my father's empire crumbled in real time, let me ask you something. How's your day going? Where are you watching this from? I hope wherever you are, you're somewhere that feels like home, because home is something I spent most of my life searching for, and something I learned you can't beg people to give you. If you're someone who's ever felt like you didn't belong, like you were always trying to prove your worth to people who had already decided you weren't enough, like love was something you had to earn instead of something you deserved, then this story is for you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the kind of justice that doesn't come from courtrooms, it comes from truth. But let me start from the beginning. Back when I still believed that if I just smiled harder, worked harder, loved harder, I could finally become a real Portman. Back to the night that changed everything. The night Elena died. And the night her husband, my adoptive father, decided I was no longer worth keeping. It was a Tuesday evening in October, when Mark Portman threw me out of the only home I'd ever known. The sky had that cold blue tint that comes just before twilight, when the world feels like it's holding its breath, the kind of evening that should have been peaceful. But there was nothing peaceful about the way two security guards flanked me as I stood at the top of the marble steps outside the Portman estate, clutching a duffel bag that held everything I was allowed to take. One bag, 18 years of my life, and I got one bag. Elena had been buried 5 days ago. 5 days since I'd watched them lower her casket into the ground, while Mark stood stiff and silent beside me, his hand never once reaching for mine. 5 days since I'd cried myself to sleep in the bedroom she used to tuck me into every night when I was little, whispering, "You're my daughter, Sonia. Don't ever forget that." And now, Mark was making sure I did forget. "Let's make this quick," he said, his voice flat and businesslike, like he was closing a deal instead of erasing a daughter. He stood at the top of the steps with his arms crossed, flanked by his two biological daughters, Ivy and Claire. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Perfectly styled hair, designer athleisure, and expressions that made it clear they'd been waiting for this moment. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed up. "You don't have to do this," I finally whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "I know you're grieving. I know losing Elena. Don't—" Mark cut me off, his jaw tightening. "Don't say her name like you have any right to grieve her the way we do." The words hit me like a slap, She was my mother too, I said, my voice breaking. Claire laughed, actually laughed, a short, cruel sound that echoed off the stone columns. She wasn't your mother, Sonia, Claire said, tilting her head like she was explaining something to a child. She was our mother. You were her project. Ivy didn't say anything. She just looked at me with the same cold indifference I'd seen in Mark's eyes 1,000 times before. I turned back to Mark, searching his face for any trace of the man who used to let me sit on his lap during family movie nights when I was 8. The man who'd smiled just once when I won the state spelling bee in 5th grade. But that man was gone. Or maybe he'd never existed at all. Mark, please, I begged, and I hated myself for it. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have any money. That's not my problem. His voice was ice. You were never legally finalized as part of this family, Sonia. Elena handled the adoption paperwork, and after reviewing everything with our attorneys, we discovered that certain documents were never properly filed. I stared at him, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you have no legal claim to this house, this family, or anything in it, Mark said, his tone sharp and final. Elena may have wanted you here, but she's gone, and I'm not obligated to continue her charity work. Charity work. That's what I was to him. I felt something break inside me, something I didn't know could still break after all these years of trying to earn his love. You can't do this, I said, but even as I said it, I knew he could. Mark pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and held it out. This is a check for $5,000, enough to get you started somewhere else. Take it, and we're done. I didn't move. Take it, Sonia. His voice was harder now, impatient. One of the security guards stepped forward and placed the envelope on top of my duffel bag. I looked down at it, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. Not in front of them. Not again. If you really cared about Elena, I said quietly, lifting my eyes to meet his, you wouldn't be doing this. For just a second, just a flash, I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Regret, maybe. Or guilt. But then it was gone. Goodbye, Sonia. He turned and walked back into the house. Ivy followed without a word. Claire paused at the door, glancing back at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good luck out there, she said sweetly. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. You always were resourceful. And then she was gone too. The door closed with a heavy, final thud. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the place where they'd been, my hands trembling around the straps of my duffel bag. The security guards waited in silence, their faces unreadable. Finally, one of them cleared his throat. Ma'am, we need you to leave the property. I nodded slowly, unable to speak. I walked down those marble steps for the last time, each one feeling like a mile. When I reached the circular driveway, I stopped and turned back to look at the house. It was massive and beautiful, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, the kind of house people dreamed of living in. But it had never been a home. Not really. Not for me. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and started walking toward the front gate, my sneakers crunching on the gravel. I made it halfway down the driveway before I had to stop. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the duffel bag and sank to my knees right there on the cold stone, pressing my hands to my chest as sobs tore through me, ugly, gasping sobs that I'd been holding in for 5 days. For 18 years. I cried for Elena, the only person who'd ever made me feel like I mattered. I cried for the little girl I used to be, the one who believed that love was something you could earn if you were just good enough. And I cried for the woman. I was now 26 years old, with nowhere to go and no one to call. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually the tears stopped. I wiped my face, picked up my bag, and kept walking. I didn't look back again. It wasn't until I reached the bus stop 2 miles down the road that I noticed something sticking out of the side pocket of my duffel bag. An envelope, cream-colored, expensive paper. My name written on the front in Elena's handwriting. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It was sealed with wax, something Elena used to do for special occasions. I stared at it for a long time, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might say, afraid it would break me all over again. But finally, I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the letter inside. And as I read the first line, the world tilted. My dearest Sonia, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I pray that Mark has shown you more mercy than I fear he will. I read Elena's letter 3 times before my hands stopped shaking enough to fold it back into the envelope. The bus stop bench was cold beneath me, and the streetlights had begun to flicker on one by one, casting long shadows across the empty road. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, because everything I thought I knew about my life had just been rewritten in Elena's careful, slanted handwriting. You were never a charity case, sweetheart. You were a promise. I closed my eyes and let the words sink in, each one a small earthquake in my chest. 12 years earlier, I was 8 years old the first time I met Elena Portman. I'd been in foster care for 2 years by then, bouncing between 3 different homes, each one a little colder than the last. I'd learned not to unpack my suitcase all the way. I'd learned not to call anyone Mum. I'd learned that love was something other kids got, not me. But then Elena walked into the adoption agency with a smile that made me feel like the sun had just come out. She knelt down in front of me, her perfume soft and expensive, her eyes the kindest I'd ever seen. "Hi, Sonia," she said gently. "My name is Elena. I've been looking for you for a very long time." I didn't understand what she meant, but I liked the way she said my name, like it mattered. She took me home that day. Not to visit, to stay. The Portman estate was the biggest house I'd ever seen. It had a grand staircase, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a bedroom that Elena said was mine. She tucked me in that first night, sitting on the edge of the bed and brushing my hair back from my forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I promised your mama I'd take care of you, and I keep my promises." I didn't know who she was talking about. I didn't remember my birth mother. But I remember the way Elena's voice cracked when she said it, like she was carrying a weight I couldn't see. Present. I opened my eyes and pulled the letter out again, reading the part I'd underlined in my mind. "Your birth mother, Grace, was my best friend. We met in college and became inseparable. She was brilliant, Sonia, so much like you. When she got pregnant with you, she was terrified, but she loved you from the very first moment. Grace. My mother's name was Grace." I whispered it out loud, tasting it like something sacred. "Grace died in a car accident when you were 3 years old. She made me promise on her deathbed that I would find you and raise you as my own. I didn't adopt you out of pity, Sonia. I adopted you because you are the daughter of the woman I loved like a sister. You were always supposed to be mine." Tears blurred my vision, hot and relentless. Elena hadn't taken me in because she felt sorry for me. She'd taken me in because she'd promised. Because my mother, Grace, had trusted her. Because I wasn't a charity case or a project or a burden. I was wanted. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed, right there on that bench, under the dim glow of the streetlight. For 18 years, I had believed I was an outsider, a mistake, a girl who had to earn every scrap of love she received. But I was wrong. Elena had loved me from the very beginning, and my birth mother had loved me enough to make sure I'd be safe, even after she was gone. I forced myself to keep reading, even though my hands were trembling so badly the paper rattled. "There's something else you need to know, sweetheart. Something Mark has kept hidden from you." My stomach dropped. When Grace died, she left behind a trust fund for you, over $4 million, intended to be released to you when you turned 25. She wanted to make sure you'd never be dependent on anyone, that you'd have the freedom to build whatever life you wanted. $4 million. I read the sentence again and again. Mark discovered the trust 3 years after we finalized your adoption. I didn't know he'd found it until recently, when I confronted him about some financial discrepancies in our accounts. He's been hiding it from you, Sonia. He altered documents. He told me the trust had been dissolved due to legal complications, but I hired a private investigator, and the truth is, it's still there. It's still yours. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might break through my ribs. Mark had stolen from me. He'd looked me in the eye for years, watched me struggle through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, watched me beg him for help with textbooks and rent, and the whole time, he'd been sitting on millions that belonged to me. I've included all the documentation in a safety deposit box at Capital Trust Bank on 5th and Monroe. The key is taped to the bottom of the jewelry box. I left you in my will. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner, Sonia. I was afraid of what Mark would do if he knew I'd found out, but you deserve the truth, and you deserve every single dollar your mother left for you. The letter ended with one final line, written in shaky letters, like her hand had been unsteady. You are not what they said you were, my darling girl. You are more. You always were. Love, always, Elena. I sat there in the dark, clutching that letter like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Mark hadn't just thrown me out. He'd erased me. He'd stolen my inheritance, hidden my mother's love, pretended I didn't matter. And Elena, sweet, brave Elena, had tried to protect me, even from beyond the grave. I looked down at the duffel bag at my feet. Inside was the small wooden jewelry box Elena had left me in the will. The one thing Mark couldn't take because it had been specified by name in legal documents. I unzipped the bag with shaking hands, pulled out the box, and turned it over. Taped to the bottom, just like she said, was a small silver key. I held it up to the light, my heart pounding. This key was my future, my freedom, my proof that I wasn't nothing, and Mark Portman had no idea it existed. I wiped my eyes, stood up, and slung the duffel bag over my shoulder. The bus pulled up a moment later, its brakes hissing in the quiet night. I stepped on board, clutching the key in my fist. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was never going to beg for my place in this world again. 3 years later, I was living in a city where no one knew my name. Well, not my real name, anyway. I went by Sophia Green now. It wasn't legal, wasn't official, but it was enough to keep me off Mark Portman's radar. Enough to let me disappear into the kind of life where nobody asked questions and nobody expected anything from you. I worked 3 jobs. Mornings, I was a barista at a cafe called Hendrix on the corner of Ash and 4th. The kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon, where regulars knew your face, but not your story. Afternoons, I did data entry for a small marketing firm that didn't care if you had a degree as long as you met your deadlines. Nights, I cleaned office buildings downtown. It paid cash, and the supervisor didn't ask for references. I lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin, the heat barely worked, and sometimes I could hear the couple next door fighting in Spanish at 2 in the morning. But it was mine. No one could take it from me. No one could throw me out. And that was enough. Most days, I was fine. I'd wake up before dawn, pull my hair into a bun, and go through the motions. Smile at customers, input spreadsheets, mop floors, come home. Sleep. Repeat. I didn't let myself think about the Portman estate. I didn't let myself think about Ivy and Claire, probably spending my inheritance on vacation homes and designer handbags. And I definitely didn't let myself think about him, Daniel. But some nights, when the apartment was too quiet and the loneliness pressed in like a weight on my chest, I'd pull out my phone and scroll back through old photos I should have deleted years ago. There was one of us at a college football game, his arms slung around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something I couldn't even remember anymore. There was another from the night he told me he loved me for the first time. We were sitting on the steps outside the library, and he'd just kissed me under the glow of the streetlights, his hands cupping my face like I was something precious. I remembered every word he'd said. I don't care what anyone thinks, Sonia. I don't care about your last name or your family or any of that. I care about you, just you. I'd believed him. God, I'd believed him so completely. Flashback. 3 years earlier, 2 weeks after Elena's death. I was still living in a motel back then, surviving on the $5,000 Mark had given me and trying to figure out my next move. I hadn't told Daniel what happened yet. I couldn't. Every time I tried to call him, I'd stare at his name on my screen and feel the weight of shame crushing my chest. What was I supposed to say? Hey, sorry, I've been distant lately. My dad threw me out, and it turns out I was never really part of the family. Also, I'm currently living in a roach-infested motel, and I don't know if I can afford to eat tomorrow. He deserved better than that. Better than me. But Daniel didn't wait for me to call. He showed up. I opened the motel door one evening to find him standing there, his hair messy from the wind, his eyes full of worry. "Sonia, what the hell is going on?" he said, his voice tight. "You haven't answered my calls in 2 weeks. Your sisters told me you left town, but they wouldn't say why. I went to the house. And your dad—" "Don't," I whispered, stepping back. "Don't say his name." Daniel's face crumpled. "Baby, what happened?" I shook my head, tears already burning behind my eyes. "You need to leave, Daniel." "What?" "No. Sonia, talk to me." "I'm not who you think I am," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm not a Portman. I never was. Elena's gone, and Mark made it very clear that I don't belong anymore. So I'm done pretending." "Pretending?" Daniel stepped closer, his hands reaching for mine. "Sonia, I don't care about your last name. I never did. I care about you." "You shouldn't." "Why not?" "Because I have nothing," I shouted, the words ripping out of me like something feral. "I have no family, no money, no future. I'm living in a motel, Daniel. I'm a mess. And you're going to graduate top of your class and work for some billion-dollar company, and I want you," he said fiercely, gripping my hands. "I don't care where you're living or what your father said. I love you, Sonia. That doesn't just go away because things got hard." I wanted to believe him. I wanted it so badly it hurt. But then my phone rang. I pulled it out with shaking hands. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the voicemail that came through a moment later made my blood run cold. It was Mark's lawyer. "Miss Portman, or should I say, Miss Monroe, this is a courtesy call to inform you that any further attempts to contact the Portman family or make claims against the estate will result in legal action. Mr. Portman has made it clear that your relationship with the family has been severed. Do not contact him, his daughters, or any associates. Consider this your final warning." I stared at the phone, my whole body numb. Daniel's face had gone pale. "Sonia, what was that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. 2 days later, I left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I just disappeared. Because I couldn't drag Daniel down into the wreckage of my life. He deserved someone whole. Someone who wasn't broken. Present. I closed the photo album on my phone and set it face down on the table. 3 years, and I still thought about him every single day. I wondered if he hated me. I wondered if he'd moved on. I wondered if he ever thought about me at all. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was better off alone. But late at night, when the world was quiet and the truth had nowhere to hide, I knew I was lying. The next morning, I was wiping down tables at the cafe when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice I didn't recognize, crisp, professional, female. "Is this Sonia Portman?" My stomach dropped. "Who's asking?" "My name is Vanessa Langford. I'm an event coordinator for the Portman Foundation. We're hosting our annual gala next month, and we're looking to hire additional staff for the evening. Your name was submitted by our staffing agency." I froze. I don't think that's a good idea. The pay is excellent. $2,000 for one night's work. We're looking for experienced servers, and your profile indicated you have hospitality experience. $2,000. That was a month's rent. That was groceries for 6 weeks. That was breathing room I desperately needed. Where's the gala? I asked quietly. The Portman estate. My heart stopped. I'll send you the details, Vanessa continued smoothly. If you're interested, just confirm by the end of the week. We'd love to have you. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in the middle of the empty cafe, staring at my phone. Mark wanted me to come back. Not as a daughter, as help. And the sick part? I was actually considering it, because I needed the money, because I was tired of running, and because some broken part of me wanted to see his face one more time, just to remind myself why I left. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. God help me, I whispered. Then I texted back one word: confirmed. The night of the gala, I stood outside the Portman estate in a black server's uniform that wasn't mine, staring up at the house that used to haunt my dreams. It looked exactly the same. The same towering white columns, the same perfectly manicured hedges, the same golden light spilling from every window, making it look like something out of a fairy tale. But I knew better. Fairy tales didn't have mothers who died and fathers who threw you away. You coming or what? I turned to see another server, a young guy, maybe 19, gesturing toward the service entrance at the side of the house. I nodded and followed him, my heart hammering against my ribs. We entered through the kitchen, and the smell hit me immediately. Rosemary, garlic, fresh bread. It smelled like every holiday dinner Elena used to make, back when I still believed I had a family. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept walking. The coordinator, Vanessa, was waiting in the staff prep area with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You must be Sophia, she said, glancing down at her list. I nodded. I'd given them my fake name. No way was I putting Sonia Portman on any paperwork that might end up in Mark's hands. You'll be working the main ballroom tonight, Vanessa continued. Champagne service, hors d'oeuvres, standard stuff. Keep your head down. Stay polite. Don't engage with the guests unless they speak to you first. Got it? Got it. She handed me a tray and pointed toward the double doors that led into the heart of the house. I took a breath and stepped inside. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting soft light over the crowd of people in tuxedos and gowns. A string quartet played in the corner. Waiters moved like shadows through the room, offering drinks and tiny plates of food. And there, standing near the center of it all, was Mark Portman. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was grayer at the temples, his face a little more lined. But he still had that same commanding presence, that same easy smile he used to charm donors and investors. He was talking to a senator, his hand resting casually on the man's shoulder like they were old friends. I felt sick. I forced myself to look away and focused on my job. Smile, offer drinks, move on. Don't think, don't feel, just survive. I made it through the first hour without incident. Nobody recognized me. Why would they? I was just another server in a room full of people who didn't see staff as human beings. But then I saw Ivy. She was standing near the bar in an emerald green dress that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, laughing at something a man in a navy suit had said. Her hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. She looked happy, like she hadn't helped destroy someone's life 3 years ago. I turned to walk the other way, but it was too late. She saw me. Her eyes widened just for a second, then her mouth curved into a slow, cruel smile. She whispered something to the woman beside her. Claire, I realized, dressed in silver and dripping in diamonds, and they both looked at me. Claire's smile was sharper. Ivy started walking toward me. My hands tightened around the tray. Excuse me, Ivy said loudly, her voice cutting through the soft hum of conversation around us. "Could I get another glass of champagne?" I kept my face neutral. "Of course." I reached for a glass, but Ivy leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "I didn't know we were hiring family for staff positions now." My jaw clenched. "Must be hard," she continued, her tone syrupy sweet. "Coming back here like this, serving people in the house you used to pretend was yours." I didn't respond. I handed her the champagne with steady hands, even though I wanted to throw it in her face. "Thank you, Sophia," she said, reading my name tag with a smirk. "That's what you're going by now, isn't it?" I met her eyes, and for just a moment, I let her see the fire beneath the surface. "Enjoy your evening, ma'am," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked away before she could say anything else. I made it to the hallway outside the ballroom before I had to stop. I pressed my back against the wall, closed my eyes, and focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. "You're not that girl anymore," I told myself. "You're not the one begging for scraps. You have Elena's letter. You have the key. You have a future they know nothing about. But God, it still hurt. It hurt to be back in this house. It hurt to see them living their perfect lives while I scrubbed floors to survive. It hurt to know that Mark was in that ballroom right now, shaking hands and accepting praise, while the world had no idea what kind of man he really was. I heard footsteps and quickly straightened, wiping my eyes. But it wasn't another server. It was Mark. He stopped when he saw me, his eyes narrowing slightly, like he was trying to place my face. My heart stopped. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, his expression shifted, recognition flickering across his features. "Sonia?" His voice was quiet, almost disbelieving. I lifted my chin, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "It's Sophia now," I said coldly. He stared at me, and I saw something I didn't expect. Not anger, not shame, satisfaction. He'd wanted this. He'd wanted me to come back broken, desperate, humiliated, and I'd walked right into it. "I didn't realize you were working tonight," he said slowly, his voice laced with something that made my skin crawl. "If I had known—" "You would have what?" I interrupted. "Hired someone else? Or made sure I was here so you could enjoy this?" His jaw tightened. "You made your choices, Sonia. Don't blame me for the consequences." Before I could respond, Vanessa's voice crackled through the staff radio on my belt. "All servers to the main entrance. We have a VIP arrival." Mark's attention shifted immediately. He straightened his tie, his public mask sliding back into place. "Get back to work," he said dismissively, already turning away. I watched him walk back into the ballroom, my fists clenched so tightly, my nails dug into my palms. Then I turned and headed toward the main entrance with the rest of the staff, my heart still racing. I had no idea what VIP could possibly be important enough to pull everyone from their posts. But when I reached the entrance and saw the line of black SUVs pulling up the driveway, each one flanked by motorcycles with flashing lights, my breath caught. Security agents in dark suits stepped out first. Then the crowd inside the ballroom went completely silent, because stepping out of the center vehicle, flanked by Secret Service, was the President of the United States. And beside him, my heart stopped. Beside him, in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes scanning the crowd like he was searching for something, was Daniel. Time stopped. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean the entire world seemed to freeze. The music, the murmured conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, all of it just stopped. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance. The President of the United States stepped inside first, his presence commanding immediate respect. Cameras flashed. People straightened. Mark Portman moved to the front of the room, his face lit with the kind of smile he reserved for powerful men. But I wasn't looking at the President. I was looking at the man standing beside him, Daniel. 3 years had changed him. His shoulders were broader, his jaw sharper. His suit was custom-tailored, the kind of clothing that whispered wealth without shouting it. He moved with a quiet confidence I didn't remember, like he'd grown into a version of himself that no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. But his eyes, God, his eyes were the same, dark, intense, searching, and right now they were scanning the room like he was looking for someone. I took a step back, my tray trembling in my hands. No. This couldn't be happening. Daniel couldn't be here. Not like this. Not now. Not when I was wearing a server's uniform in the house that had thrown me away, pretending to be someone I wasn't. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark's voice boomed across the ballroom, smooth and practiced. It is my great honor to welcome the President of the United States to the Portman Foundation's annual gala. Applause erupted. The President smiled graciously, shaking Mark's hand, saying something I couldn't hear over the roaring in my ears. But Daniel didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his eyes still sweeping the crowd over the donors in their designer gowns, over the politicians and socialites, over the staff lingering near the edges of the room. And then, his gaze landed on me. Everything else disappeared. I saw the exact moment he recognized me. His entire body went rigid, his eyes widened, just slightly. His lips parted like he'd forgotten how to breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just stood there, frozen, as Daniel's expression shifted from shock to something I couldn't name, something raw and aching and desperately real. He took a step toward me, then another. The President was still talking to Mark, but Daniel wasn't listening anymore. He was walking straight toward me, cutting through the crowd like nothing else in the room mattered. People stepped aside, confused. Whispers started to ripple through the ballroom. Vanessa grabbed my arm, hissing under her breath. "What are you doing? Get back to—" But Daniel was already there. He stopped less than 3 feet away, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a marathon. Up close, I could see the faint circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for me. "Sonia," he whispered. And the way he said, my name broken, reverent, like a prayer he'd been repeating for years, shattered something inside me. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The tray slipped from my hands. It hit the marble floor with a deafening crash, champagne glasses exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces. The entire ballroom went silent. Every single person turned to stare. I didn't care, because Daniel was stepping over the shattered glass, closing the distance between us, and before I could stop him, before I could think or breathe or run, he cupped my face in his hands. His palms were warm, steady, real. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice rough and thick with emotion. "For 3 years, Sonia, I've been looking for you." Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could stop them. "Daniel, don't," he whispered, his thumb brushing away my tears. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Just God, just let me look at you." His eyes roamed my face like he was memorizing every detail, like he was afraid I'd disappear again if he blinked. I heard Mark's voice somewhere behind us, sharp and commanding. "Excuse me, what is going on here?" Daniel didn't turn around. He didn't take his eyes off me. "I found her," he said quietly, and I realized he wasn't talking to Mark. He was talking to the President. I glanced past Daniel's shoulder and saw the President watching us with an expression I couldn't read: curiosity, maybe, or understanding. Mark pushed through the crowd, his face twisted in barely concealed fury. "Mr. Cole," Mark said tightly, clearly recognizing Daniel now. "I'm sure this is some kind of misunderstanding. This young woman is part of our catering staff. Her name is Sonia Portman," Daniel interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "And she's not your staff." He finally turned to face Mark, his hand still holding mine. "She's the woman I've been searching for. The woman you lied to me about? The woman you told me had a breakdown and didn't want to be found? The room went deadly silent. Mark's face drained of color. I don't know what you think you know. I know everything, Daniel said, his voice low and lethal. I know you threw her out. I know you hid her inheritance. I know you've been lying for years. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ivy and Claire stood frozen near the bar, their faces pale. The president stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Mr. Portman, he said quietly, I think we need to have a conversation. Mark looked like he'd been struck, but Daniel wasn't done. He turned back to me, his eyes soft again, his voice breaking. I need to talk to you, he whispered. Please, Sonia, just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I stared at him, my heart breaking and mending all at once. I nodded. Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief. He laced his fingers through mine and gently pulled me toward the hallway, away from the staring crowd, away from Mark's fury, away from everything. And as we disappeared through the door, I heard the president's voice behind us, calm and firm. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll excuse us, there are some matters that need to be addressed. Daniel didn't stop walking until we were outside. Past the hallway, past the kitchen, past the side entrance where I'd arrived hours earlier, feeling small and invisible. He led me all the way to the edge of the property, near the private airstrip where a sleek jet sat gleaming under the floodlights, flanked by Secret Service vehicles. Only then did he let go of my hand. He turned to face me, and in the dim light, I could see that his eyes were wet. I can't believe you're real, he whispered. I can't believe I finally found you. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly freezing despite the warm night air. Daniel, you shouldn't have come looking for me. His face crumpled. What? You should have moved on. You should have moved on? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sonia, I spent 3 years trying to find you. I hired investigators. I tracked down every lead, every address, every alias. Do you know how many Sophia Greens there are in this country? I stared at him, my throat tight. You changed your name, he continued, his voice breaking. You disappeared completely. And the whole time I thought, God, I thought maybe you were dead, or worse. I thought maybe you just didn't want to be found. That maybe I'd done something. You didn't do anything, I choked out. Daniel, you were perfect. You were never the problem. Then why did you leave? The question hung in the air between us, sharp and painful. I closed my eyes, tears spilling over. Because I had nothing to give you, I whispered. Because Mark made it very clear that I was nobody, that I didn't belong anywhere. And you had this whole future ahead of you, and I couldn't be the broken girl dragging you down. You really believed that? Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. You really thought I cared about any of that? You should have. Well, I didn't, he shouted, and the sudden force of it made me flinch. He took a shaky breath, running his hands through his hair. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Sonia, I loved you. I love you. That didn't change because your father threw you out. That didn't change because you were hurting. It didn't change because things got hard. You don't understand. Then help me understand. His voice broke on the last word, and when I looked up, I saw tears streaming down his face. Daniel, strong, composed, brilliant Daniel was crying. After Elena died, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark told me I was never really a Portman. He said the adoption was never fully finalized, that I had no legal claim to the family. He gave me $5,000 and had security escort me off the property, like I was some kind of criminal. Daniel's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. I was living in a motel, Daniel. I couldn't afford food half the time. I didn't know where I was going to sleep the next week. And you were about to graduate top of your class. You had job offers from every major firm in the country. I couldn't. My voice cracked, and I pressed my hands to my face, trying to hold back the sobs. I couldn't let you see me like that. So you just left, Daniel said quietly, without a word, without letting me choose. I was protecting you. From what? His voice rose again. From loving you? From standing by you? Sonia, you didn't protect me. You destroyed me. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I went to the Portman house, he continued, his voice shaking. I demanded to see you, and Mark told me you'd had a breakdown, that you were unstable, that you'd left town and didn't want anyone to find you. He showed me documents, medical records, psych evaluations. What? I stared at him in horror. They were fake, Daniel said quickly. I know that now. I hired a forensic analyst who proved they were fabricated. But at the time, I didn't know what to believe. You disappeared. You wouldn't answer my calls. And your father, the man who raised you, was telling me you were in crisis and needed space. Oh my God. I felt like I was going to be sick. Mark hadn't just thrown me out. He'd erased me. He'd made sure that even the people who loved me would think I was broken, unstable, beyond help. But I never believed him, Daniel said, stepping closer. Not completely. Something didn't feel right, so I kept digging. And 3 months ago, I finally found a paper trail, bank records, lease agreements under your new name. It led me here, to this city, to you. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling as he brushed a tear from my cheek. I became the man I am now, so I'd have the resources to find you, he whispered. So I'd have the power to protect you, so that no one could ever make you disappear again. I couldn't breathe. You built an empire. For me? I built it for us, he said, his voice fierce, because you deserved someone who wouldn't give up on you. And because I knew that if I ever found you again, I'd make sure the whole world knew your name. A sob tore from my chest, and before I could stop myself, I collapsed forward into his arms. Daniel caught me, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I've got you, he whispered into my hair. I've got you, Sonia. I'm not letting go. Not ever again. And for the first time in 3 years, I let myself break. I cried for Elena, for the childhood I'd lost, for the years I'd spent believing I was worthless. I cried for the girl who'd run away because she thought she wasn't enough. And I cried for the man who'd spent 3 years refusing to let her go. Daniel held me through all of it, his own tears falling silently as he pressed his forehead to mine. Can I still love you? He whispered. Please, Sonia, can I still love you? I pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, I let myself say the truth. I never stopped loving you. His breath hitched, and then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and aching and full of 3 years of longing. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were trembling. Come back inside with me, Daniel said quietly. Let me show them who you really are. I hesitated, fear flickering in my chest. He'll destroy me, Daniel. He has money, power, lawyers, and I have the President of the United States waiting inside. Daniel said, a small, fierce smile tugging at his lips. Trust me, Sonia. Let me fight for you the way you deserved all along. I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had searched for me across state lines and sleepless nights, and I realized something. I didn't have to fight alone anymore. I nodded. Daniel laced his fingers through mine, and together we walked back toward the house. When we walked back into the ballroom, the entire room fell silent. Every eye turned toward us. Daniel's hand was wrapped around mine, firm and unyielding, and he didn't let go. Not when people started whispering. Not when Ivy's mouth dropped open in shock. Not when Mark's face twisted with barely concealed rage. The president stood near the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm but unreadable. Mark stepped forward, his voice tight and controlled. Mr. Cole, I don't know what this young woman has told you, but I assure you, stop talking, Daniel's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. Mark froze. For 3 years, Daniel continued, his tone dangerously quiet. You've been lying. To me, to your colleagues, to everyone in this room who thinks you're some kind of philanthropic hero. Mark's jaw clenched. I don't know what kind of fantasy she's fed you. Her name is Sonia, Daniel interrupted sharply. And the only person who's been lying here is you. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up. A projection screen at the front of the room flickered to life. Mark's face went white. On the screen was a scanned document, an official-looking form with the Portman family letterhead. This, Daniel said, his voice steady and cold, is a psychiatric evaluation dated 4 months after Sonia left. It claims she was experiencing severe delusions, paranoia, and emotional instability. It's signed by Dr. Raymond Kellerman, a licensed psychologist. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Except, Daniel continued, Dr. Kellerman never met Sonia. In fact, when my investigators contacted him, he confirmed that this document is a forgery. Someone used his credentials without his knowledge or consent. Gasps echoed through the room. Mark's hands curled into fists. That's absurd. I would never. The signature on the approval form, Daniel said, his eyes boring into Mark's, belongs to you. The room erupted. Whispers became shouts. Cameras flashed. Reporters who'd been covering the gala as a puff piece suddenly looked like wolves, scenting blood. Mark's face was red now, his composure cracking. This is a setup. You have no proof. I have 6 months' worth of financial records, Daniel said, pulling up another document on the screen. Records showing that you've been concealing a multi-million-dollar trust fund that was left to Sonia by her biological mother. My breath caught. He'd found it. Daniel had found everything. That trust, Daniel continued, was established 23 years ago by Grace Monroe, Sonia's birth mother and your wife's best friend. It was meant to be released to Sonia on her 25th birthday. But you hid it. You altered the paperwork. You told Sonia and everyone else that it didn't exist. The crowd was in chaos now. Claire looked like she might faint. Ivy had gone pale, her eyes wide with panic. And Mark looked like a cornered animal. You have no right to make these accusations, he hissed. I have every right, Daniel said quietly, because I love her and because you tried to erase her. He turned to face the crowd, his voice rising. Sonia Portman was 8 years old when she was adopted into this family. She spent 18 years trying to earn the love of a man who saw her as nothing more than a burden. And when the one person who truly loved her, Elena Portman, died, Mark threw Sonia out with nothing but a bag and $5,000. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. He told her she was never really part of the family, Daniel continued, his voice shaking with emotion. He told her the adoption was never finalized. And then he lied to everyone who tried to find her. He forged documents. He hid her inheritance. He made sure she had no way to fight back. The room was completely silent now. Even the reporters had stopped moving. Daniel turned back to Mark, his eyes blazing. You're not a philanthropist, Mr. Portman. You're a thief, and worse, you're a coward. Mark's face was purple with rage. How dare you? I dare, Daniel said softly. Because she couldn't. He turned to me then, his expression softening. But she can now. He held out his hand. I stared at it, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment I could step forward and reclaim everything Mark had stolen from me. My name, my history, my truth. I looked at Mark, at the man who'd let me call him Dad for 10 years before Elena died, and then pretended I'd never existed. And I realized something. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I took Daniel's hand and stepped forward. The president moved beside us, his presence a silent endorsement that made the cameras flash even harder. My name is Sonia Portman, I said, my voice shaking but clear. And everything Daniel just said is true. Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You told me I was nothing, I continued, my voice growing stronger. You told me I didn't belong. You made me believe that love was something I had to earn and that I'd failed. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. But you were wrong. I looked at Daniel, at the man who'd spent 3 years searching for me. I was always enough, I whispered. I just needed someone to see it. Daniel's eyes were wet, but he was smiling. The president stepped forward then, his voice calm and authoritative. Mr. Portman, he said quietly, I believe the authorities will want to speak with you. Fraud, forgery, financial misconduct, these are serious allegations. Mark looked around the room desperately, but no one met his eyes. Not his daughters, not his board members, not a single person in that ballroom. This isn't over, Mark said, his voice low and venomous. Yes, Daniel said quietly, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. It is. 2 men in dark suits, federal agents, I realized, stepped forward. Mr. Portman, we're going to need you to come with us. Mark's face crumpled, and as they escorted him out of the ballroom he'd built his empire in, past the people he'd spent decades impressing, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. Daniel pulled me close, pressing a kiss to my temple. You did it, he whispered. We did it, I corrected. He smiled against my skin, and for the first time in 3 years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I was finally home. The ballroom emptied quickly after that. Guests shuffled out in uncomfortable silence, their faces a mix of shock and barely concealed eagerness to spread the gossip. By morning, the Portman name would be on every news outlet in the country, but I didn't care about them. I stood near the window, watching the federal agents escort Mark into an unmarked car. His hands weren't cuffed, not yet, but his shoulders were slumped in a way I'd never seen before. He looked small, powerless, human. Ivy and Claire stood near the entrance, their designer gowns suddenly seeming like costumes. Claire was crying, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. Ivy just stared at the floor, her arms wrapped around herself. For a moment, just a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But then I remembered the way they'd laughed when Mark threw me out, the way they'd whispered cruel things just loud enough for me to hear, the way they'd erased me from every family photo, every memory, every story. They'd made their choice. Now they had to live with it. Daniel's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through mine like they belonged there. You okay? He asked softly. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure it was true. The president approached us then, his expression kind. Miss Portman, he said, extending his hand. It took courage to do what you just did. I shook his hand, still half in disbelief that this was real. Thank you, Mr. President, I whispered, for being here, for believing me. He smiled gently. I didn't come here for Mark Portman. I came because Daniel Cole is one of the most brilliant young minds in this country, and when he told me there was an injustice that needed to be made right, I believed him. He glanced at Daniel with something like respect. He's been talking about you for 6 months, you know. Every meeting, every briefing, he'd find a way to mention the woman he was searching for, the woman who deserved better. My throat tightened. Daniel's cheeks flushed slightly, but he didn't deny it. The president nodded to both of us. I'll leave you two alone. But Miss Portman, if you ever need anything, you have my personal number. He handed me a card, then turned and walked toward his security detail. I stared at the card in my hand, my mind spinning. Did the President of the United States just give me his phone number? I whispered. Daniel laughed softly. Yeah, he did. We stood there in the empty ballroom for a long moment, the silence almost peaceful now. Then Daniel turned to me, his expression serious. There's something I need to show you. He led me out of the ballroom, down a hallway I recognized, and into what used to be Mark's private study. The room was exactly as I remembered: dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk that had always made me feel small when I was a child. Daniel walked over to the desk and pulled out a folder. "My investigators found this 3 weeks ago," he said quietly, handing it to me. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a copy of Elena's will, the real one, not the version Mark had presented to the lawyers. And in it, written in Elena's careful handwriting, was a clause I'd never seen before. "To my beloved daughter Sonia, I leave the Green Street property, the art collection housed within, and 50% of my personal estate. She is, and has always been, my daughter in every way that matters." I stared at the words, my vision blurring. 50%. Elena had left me half of everything she owned. "Mark suppressed it," Daniel said gently. "He filed a different version with the probate court. But the original was stored in Elena's safety deposit box at the bank, the same one mentioned in her letter to you." I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears streaming down my face. "She fought for me," I whispered, "even after she was gone." "She loved you," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "And she made sure you'd be taken care of. Mark just tried to steal it." I looked up at him, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. "How much? How much what? How much is 50% of Elena's estate worth?" Daniel hesitated, then said quietly, $12 million, plus the property, which is worth another 8. The room spun. $20 million. I'd been scrubbing floors for 3 years, living in a studio above a laundromat, rationing grocery money. And the whole time, I'd been a millionaire. I started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes when your brain can't process reality anymore. Daniel pulled me into his arms, holding me as I laughed and cried at the same time. "It's yours, Sonia," he whispered into my hair. "All of it. And Mark can't touch it. The federal investigation will freeze his assets, and the probate court will reopen Elena's will. You'll get everything she wanted you to have." I pulled back, looking up at him through my tears. "I don't know what to do with all of this." He smiled softly, brushing a tear from my cheek. "You don't have to figure it out tonight. But I have an idea." "What?" "Elena loved art. She loved helping people. What if you use the Green Street property to start a foundation in her name, something that helps kids in foster care, kids like you?" My breath caught. "A foundation? You could call it the Elena Portman Foundation for Children," Daniel said, his eyes shining. "Or the Grace and Elena Memorial Fund, whatever feels right. But Sonia, you could help so many kids who feel the way you did. You could give them what you never had." I stared at him, my heart swelling. "You really thought about this?" "I've thought about everything," he said softly. "I've thought about what your life could look like if you'd just let me be part of it." He took a shaky breath. "I know I have no right to ask this. I know you've been through hell. But Sonia," he dropped to one knee. My heart stopped. "I don't have a ring yet," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't plan this. But I can't wait another second." He looked up at me, his eyes wet with tears. "Sonia Portman, I have loved you since the day you walked into my economics class and argued with the professor about income inequality. I loved you when you were a Portman, and I loved you when you were Sophia Green. I will love you no matter what name you choose or what life you build." His voice cracked. "Will you marry me?" I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Yes," I finally whispered. "Yes." Daniel stood and pulled me into his arms, kissing me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months later, I stood in front of a building I never thought I'd own. The Green Street property was a beautiful 3-story brownstone in the heart of the city, with tall windows that let in golden afternoon light and a small garden out back that still had some of Elena's rose bushes blooming. The sign above the door read, The Elena and Grace Foundation. A home for those still searching for one. I ran my fingers over the brass plaque, my throat tight with emotion. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "She would have loved this," he said softly. "I hope so," I whispered. Inside, the space had been transformed. What used to be Elena's private art studio was now a library filled with books for kids of all ages. The second floor housed meeting rooms where social workers, tutors, and therapists could work with children in the foster system. The third floor had been converted into a small apartment where teens aging out of foster care could stay while they got on their feet. It wasn't massive, it wasn't flashy, but it was real, and it was helping people who needed it most. "You ready for today?" Daniel asked, pressing a kiss to my temple. I took a deep breath and nodded. Today was the official opening. We'd invited former foster kids, social workers, journalists, and a few donors who actually cared about the mission, not just the photo op. And we'd invited Ivy and Claire. I didn't know if they'd come. Honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted them to. The last 6 months had been a whirlwind. Mark's arrest had made national headlines. The charges were serious: fraud, forgery, embezzlement, obstruction of justice. His legal team was fighting hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. The Portman Foundation had collapsed almost overnight. Board members resigned, donors pulled funding. His name, once synonymous with charity and goodwill, was now synonymous with corruption. Ivy and Claire had tried to distance themselves publicly, releasing statements about how shocked and heartbroken they were. But the damage was done. Their social media pages were flooded with criticism. Their friends stopped calling. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I didn't grieve for them either. They'd had a choice, just like Mark, and they'd chosen wrong. An hour before the event, I was adjusting a display of children's artwork when I heard the door open. I turned and froze. Claire stood in the doorway, looking nothing like the polished socialite I remembered. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater, no makeup, no jewelry. She looked smaller. "Hi," she said quietly. I didn't respond right away. Daniel, who'd been setting up chairs in the next room, stepped into the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. Claire's eyes flicked to him, then back to me. "I know I have no right to be here," she said, her voice shaking, "but I needed to see you. I needed to say." She stopped, her face crumpling. "I'm so sorry, Sonia." The words hung in the air between us. I stared at her, my arms crossed over my chest. "You're sorry," I repeated flatly. "I know it's not enough," Claire said, tears streaming down her face now. "I know I can never take back the things I said or the way I treated you, but I need you to know that I see it now. I see how wrong we were, how wrong I was." She took a shaky breath. "I spent my whole life doing whatever Dad told me to do, believing whatever he said, and when he said you didn't belong, I didn't question it. I didn't think about what it was doing to you." Her voice broke. "But I should have. You were my sister, Sonia, and I failed you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to tell her that sorry didn't erase 18 years of cruelty. But another part of me, the part that had spent 6 months in therapy, working through the pain and learning to let go, knew that holding on to anger would only hurt me, not her. Me. "I forgive you," I said quietly. Claire's eyes widened. "But that doesn't mean I trust you," I continued. "And it doesn't mean we're going to be close. You made choices, Claire, and those choices have consequences." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand, but if you really want to make things right," I said, my voice softening slightly, "then prove it. Volunteer here. Show up. Do the work. Not for me, for the kids who need people to fight for them the way no one fought for me. Claire looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." She turned and left without another word. Daniel came up beside me, taking my hand. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am." The event was beautiful. Over 100 people showed up, former foster kids who shared their stories, donors who wrote checks on the spot, and local news crews who actually seemed to care about the mission. But the moment that broke me was when a little girl, no more than 7, with braids and wide brown eyes, walked up to me holding a drawing. "I made this for you," she said shyly. I knelt down to her level and took the picture. It was a drawing of 2 people holding hands under a rainbow. "That's you and me," she said, pointing. "Because you made a place where kids like me don't have to be scared anymore." Tears blurred my vision as I pulled her into a hug. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me." She beamed and ran back to her foster mom. Daniel crouched beside me, his own eyes wet. "This is what it's all about," he said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, after everyone had left, Daniel and I sat on the front steps of the foundation, watching the city lights flicker to life. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, playing with my engagement ring, a simple diamond band he'd given me 2 months ago in Elena's garden. About the wedding." I smiled. "What about it? I don't want something big. I don't want cameras or reporters or a guest list full of people we barely know." He turned to look at me, his eyes soft. "I just want you, and maybe a few people who actually matter. What do you think?" I leaned my head on his shoulder. "I think that sounds perfect." He kissed the top of my head, and we sat there in comfortable silence. After a long moment, I spoke. "Do you remember what you said to me that night at the gala, when you found me?" "Which part?" "You said, 'I've been looking for you.'" Daniel nodded. "I remember." I turned to face him, taking both of his hands in mine. "I spent my whole life thinking I needed to be found," I said quietly. "That I needed someone to see me, to choose me, to prove I was worth something." Tears filled my eyes, but I was smiling. "But the truth is I wasn't lost, Daniel. I was just becoming who I was always meant to be." His breath hitched. "And you didn't save me," I whispered. "You loved me enough to let me save myself." Daniel pulled me into his arms, and I felt his tears against my hair. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "God, Sonia, I love you so much. I love you too." We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the noise of the city fading into the background. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Because I finally understood something Elena had been trying to tell me all along. I wasn't defined by the people who threw me away. I was defined by the people who stayed, by the love that refused to let go, and by the little girl inside me who'd survived it all and finally learned that she was enough. 3 months later, I married Daniel in Elena's garden, surrounded by roses and sunlight. There were only 12 people there, a few close friends, the president who'd become an unlikely mentor, and Claire, who'd spent the last 3 months volunteering at the foundation every single week. Ivy didn't come, but she sent a letter. I didn't read it that day, but I kept it. Maybe one day I'd be ready. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Daniel kissed me like the world had stopped turning, and as we walked back down the aisle hand in hand, I looked up at the sky and whispered 2 words. Thank you. To Elena, who'd kept her promise. To Grace, who'd loved me before I could even remember. And to the little girl I used to be, the one who'd believed she'd never be enough. You were always enough, I told her silently. You always were. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like you had to earn love? Like you weren't enough unless someone chose you? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. Because you're not alone. And just like Sonia, your story isn't over yet. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we were always worth fighting for. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are not what they said you were. You are more. You always were.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.